Thank you all for coming tonight. This is the Opportunity Zones Meetup. We are a group that comes together and share information on opportunity zones as a tax incentive for improving the economic health of distressed communities across the United States and in the territories. And tonight's program is going to be on the topic of skills training, and it can be both its own independent focus of an Opportunity Zone Fund, or it could be a subcomponent or program of a larger real estate development or community development. And so we'll be talking about that in more detail as we move forward with tonight's program, because what we're seeing is that moving into a community, particularly when it's had economic stress on it, quite often there's already a problem with worker skill and training, and it's worse in these communities than maybe elsewhere. And then if you roll in a brand new business and everything looks great, the business can't get the traction, can't perform the way it wants to because there aren't enough workers on board. So you start seeing a cascade issue occur where you're saying, yeah, now I've got the tax incentive, but then I need the business that creates the jobs, and with the jobs I need the housing, and then I need to train the people in order to fill the jobs. And this becomes a complete retooling or makeover of a community where opportunity zones may act as a catalyst to allow this to start, but the strategy and planning of an individual project has to take all these different factors into consideration, or you may not see the outcomes that you're looking for. So my name's Karl Dakin. I am the owner of Dakin Capital, and one of the things I do in my hat with Dakin Capital is I work with opportunity zones. I provide strategy development, I work with fund formation, and then I work with management of capital campaigns. And at the current time, I am both a principal in one opportunity zone project that is underway, a large mixed-use multi-purpose real estate project. I've just been added to the board of advisors for Invest New Mexico US, which is a New Mexico small business multi-asset fund that will be starting their capital campaign next week out of Albuquerque. And then I'm consulting with a variety of people in both real estate and business and communities about getting their particular projects started. And some of these are in opportunity zones where they're looking for that to be the primary source of equity. And in other cases, we're trying to marry or match that with other sources of funding, both to get the project going and to have enough money to go out and do a full tilt raise. And in other cases, it's more of a secondary factor. But I provide consulting and sometimes take a leadership role in projects of this nature. And this is an area that's growing very, very rapidly as more people become familiar with it. I'm still running into people like a real estate agent I met last Saturday who had never heard of opportunity zones, knew nothing about it, and this was all new stuff. At the same time, there have been people who have been advocating for this, who actually advocated before the legislation was passed in 2017. And they're continuing to develop tools and systems, and there are certain states who are getting more and more organized about how they're supporting opportunity zones. And so we're seeing just a nice geometric growth rate take place across the United States. There was a good conference last week. It was a webinar by NES Financial, who I'm working with regard to the New Mexico project. They're going to post that webinar online, and I'll put it up on the Meetup site so you can all see it. It was primarily an aggregate overview by 4 or 5 people who do a lot of work in the area, showing how the trends had started with real estate, most of which were projects already in motion, with the new rules in April that businesses are now starting to, projects are occurring faster and taking up a greater and greater percentage of overall projects. And at the same time, the motivation for investing in a project, social impact investing, is a rapidly growing reason why people are getting behind Opportunity Zone projects. So we're seeing a shift take place pretty much like we were anticipating, where real estate would start out first, followed by businesses, followed by community projects. And it just takes longer for communities to get organized. But we're now seeing more and more of those pop up that have low or flat ROIs, but they still have a chance to take advantage of this source of funding. So that's what I work with. It's my goal to understand every way possible to get a new project, a new business off the ground. And so right now we're doing more work with complementary funding that would work hand in hand with Opportunity Zone funding. At this point, this is part one of tonight's program. We always break these into 3 or 4 parts to make it shorter and easier for people to review during the video recording. We'll take a break in between each section, so you can all stand up, but it also allows us to handle the recording equipment and make sure everything's where we want it to be. All of you in the room, I recognize all of you who are here tonight, all have a general familiarity with Opportunity Zones. It was legislation that was passed in 2017 under the tax bill. The purpose of the legislation was to incentivize people who had money that they had gained from selling capital assets to roll those over into specific geographic areas across the United States where that money might do more good, might have more impact by turning the tide, creating economic activity within these geographic areas, and helping some of them catch up and get better and more healthy from an economic standpoint. And so there are 3 primary incentives for people to roll over their capital gains, including pulling it out of Wall Street, where it may have been sitting idle for years, if not decades, and putting it into something that's more active, where the money's doing harder work, both for the investor as well as for the community. And the first of these is that if you have sold a capital asset, ordinarily in the next tax year, you're going to be paying capital gains taxes on that at one of the capital gains rates based upon your level of income. Well, that tax is deferred now until 2026, so you get a benefit from it because you don't have to pay those taxes right away. Yes?
Is it okay to ask?
Yes, please.
So in order to qualify for that deferment, do we have to purchase the property in the zone within that tax year?
No. So the time frame on that is that once you recognize your capital gain, you've sold a capital asset, you have a period of time in which you have to take that money, which is the gain, not the underlying principal, but the net profit that would be taxable, and you have to invest that into an Opportunity Zone fund. And the short answer is it's 6 months from when you recognize the gain. But because if it's a pass-through tax entity where it was recognized, such as an LLC or partnership, they don't formally recognize those gains till January 1st. So if you had sold a property through an LLC in January of this year, you wouldn't actually recognize it till January 1st of next year. And then you have 6 months till June 30th in which to invest that into an Opportunity Zone fund, which will qualify it then for the tax incentives. Okay. Now, once it's in the Opportunity Zone fund, that fund has 6 months in which to deploy that money into an Opportunity Zone business or property. But again, with the new rules that came out in April, if this is the first time a fund has recognized money coming into the fund, it doesn't have to recognize that till the next 6 months. So again, you've got, in many cases, more than the limit of 6 months in which to make something happen. But you have to be very, very conscious of both the time to invest into the fund and then the time for the fund to deploy that money into a business or property. So, so if you make that investment, though, instead of having, if you had earned capital gains in this year that you would have recognized, you would have had to pay taxes on these in 2020, but now you get to defer paying those taxes till 2026. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit is that if you leave the money in a capital gain, or in an opportunity zone fund for 5 years or 7 years, you get a reduction in the amount of taxes that you have to pay. So if you leave it in 5 years, meaning that if you invested today and before 2026, 5 years takes place, and you still have the money sitting there, then you get a 10% reduction in the taxes that you would have paid in 2020. So if you would have owed $100,000 in taxes on all the capital gains that you earned this year, you would only pay $90,000 in taxes when in 2026. Now, if you leave it in for 7 years, you get an extra 5% drop. So instead of paying $100,000, you now pay $90,000. Now you pay $85,000. So it's $15,000 off of $100,000 of tax liability. And part of the reason you hear people talking about you got to hurry, hurry, hurry is because if you don't invest by the end of this year, you have no chance of getting the 7-year threshold. It's just a timeline thing. You still have time to go 5 years, but not for the 7. And a lot of people, the difference isn't that big to them between a 10 and 15% discount in the tax liability, because the big benefit, the really big benefit, is if you leave the money in for 10 years or more, and you can leave it in until 2046. But if you leave it in for 10 years, then all the gain on the new investment is tax-free. So that's what most people are shooting for. Larger groups, financial institutions are very sensitive about the discounted taxes and so forth. But to most investors I'm working with, they're all focused on the 10-year horizon, where they want to get an investment that generates a good rate of return to a great rate of return and have all that tax-free. So that's the point of the opportunity zones from the investor standpoint. From the community standpoint, they now have a reason to ask someone to invest in their community instead of investing outside of their community. It's a major incentive for someone to rethink, reconsider where they want to place their money, and because of all these incentives that come along with it. So it's a big deal. One of the other observations I'll make at this point is, as I said earlier, most of the investments have been in real estate. And real estate, as was the subject of one of our events, has sort of an inherent limitation on how much gain you're going to see, because if you buy raw land and develop it, it'll increase in value, and then over time you'll see some appreciation subject to fluctuations in the economy, but there's still going to be a bit of a cap or a topping out or plateauing of how much money you can make. But if you have a company like Jeff, who just walked in the room, who is starting an online app that will facilitate moving photos and images around, a business has technically no real limit. It's whatever the market will allow it to do. So when you compare a real estate investment in an opportunity zone with a business in an opportunity zone, a high-flying, fast-growing, high-tech business could have a massive upside with a massive waiver of tax liability corresponding to that, because of the fact that all that gain occurred in a business that met all the requirements of being a qualified opportunity zone business. And so it will vary greatly from project to project. What you can do, if you're working in a rural community, you're going to see some constraints because of population or access to resources or workers, which is part of tonight's topic. And then we will see other issues that will creep into the situation depending upon where you're at. So one of the things that I've been doing, where I try to bring my form of creativity to the table, is I've been looking at opportunity zones and recognizing that throughout my entire 40-year career in this area, I've been primarily working with short-term investments, things where we're going to get in or out. We're going to try to introduce a technology to the market, get it to a certain point, and then sell it off or step out of the project and go out and get another project. And the short-term investment has a number of characteristics which tends to be the common way that everybody looks at investments everywhere. But when we get into opportunity zones with a 10-year horizon in order to get to the maximum benefits, we're now looking at what we would call long-term investment. And long-term investments have different characteristics because you now have to think about risk that can creep into things that are not visible. It's like sailing on the ocean and seeing to the horizon, and there may be a threat beyond the horizon you can't see because of the curvature of the earth. In the same way, you get into long-term investments, some of these risks are simply invisible to you now. That isn't that they're not there, but you can't see them. The other thing is you're getting into the compounding of money, that if you put money into an account at a certain rate of interest over a period of time, the size of the money will double, depending upon the interest rate that is being attributed to that. Well, in a 10-year cycle, that's quite possible in several types of investments where the rate of return, the interest rate, whatever, is at such a level that you're actually going to see the value of the investment double regardless of its performance. If it just matches say, a consumer price index or inflation rate or something like that. So when we start looking at this starts changing how you look and consider an investment. And when you do that, then you realize that there may be other things you can do that can either create more benefits, a higher ROI, improve the probability of success of a particular project. And that's where a lot of my work has been focused through the summer and has been the subject of the last 2 meetups and one earlier this spring and of tonight's meetup. Is we're saying, yeah, if you're going to be making a 10-year investment, what else can you do, should you do, that would make this a better investment? So one of the things that we looked at is innovation. And this is the topic that Nate and I are working on. The first of the 2 journal articles is how to embed innovation into a long-term investment in order to improve the probability of success, in order to make it more agile and responsive to marketplace changes, to improve the exit value for an investor. Rather than being completely dependent upon market forces and saying, you know, we're just going to sit it out and see whatever the market tells us in 10 years, you may be able to influence the market and influence it heavily from a local standpoint by doing different types of innovative activities. Now, this may be creation of an innovation hub within the scope of a project. It may be supporting complementary businesses that have their own life cycle and potentially a higher growth rate than that to a real estate project. And so we're going to be doing a breakout of this, and hopefully in the next 30, 60 days we'll have as I will call it, we'll do another take on this at one of our future events and let everybody know how much more we've figured out by that time. The other one is one we did a couple weeks ago, workforce housing. In this one, we basically said, yes, wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to deal with the shortage of housing, particularly in lower income stuff that ordinarily would fall under affordable housing. But in urban areas, as we recognize, as the value of real estate goes up, there is a greater disparity between that and following wages or trailing wages. And it gets to a point where the formulas for workforce housing just don't work. So we're looking at a private sector approach where the employer would play a role. The employer would step in first and offer to buy the property at the end of a 10-year cycle, so the investors have an automatic out and know what that out is going to be, at least at a platform or minimum. The employer will guarantee a commercial mortgage on the property, which makes it potentially able to get a lower price of mortgage money and makes it more attractive, again, to an investor from that standpoint. And during the 10-year term, then, this housing that's created is used as workforce housing for the employees of the employer, enabling the employer to bring in people who they want to work for them. And depending upon how the deal is structured, this may be below market rates because you don't have to recapture the principal in the cost of the payments. That's all taken care of on the back end upon the exit. So we have a project that's brewing now, one of these, and we're talking to some other people about doing a pilot project where we'll get real numbers and hopefully again in the near future we'll have something we can point to and use it as an example of how this works. Our last session we talked about insurance banking, and we worked with Unbridled Wealth, who co-presented with us. and who we're still working on, and now has a live project down in Florence, Colorado. And basically the gist of this one is that you can have people roll money into an Opportunity Zone fund, put that into a business, then that business can buy insurance in the name as an insured of your investors or your key stakeholders and so forth, and then borrow the cash value from that life insurance to go ahead and invest in the property or the businesses that you're talking about. What this does is it creates two places where your money is gaining value, one within the insurance policy and one within the project, that it can work in a complementary fashion. And by the time you get to the end of the 10 years, instead of just having all the normal gains you would have from an Opportunity Zone project, you may also have a very healthy, well-funded, with a high death benefit in a whole life insurance policy. And so Unbridled Wealth is currently demonstrating this with the purchase of a historic building in Florence, Colorado, the old high school down there. And we are mapping 10 or 20 different ways of how this might be used. They're initially using it to create cash flow to pay back the capital gains taxes in 2026. So they're not really pushing it as hard as they could. But they're going to probably do an Opportunity Zone raise to bring in the money for the retrofit reconstruction of that facility and move it into a commercial retail type of setting. And so this is one that doesn't require that you be in an Opportunity Zone to take advantage of this particular secondary benefit, but it just makes it that far more attractive. And if you're trying to raise money into a project, rather than simply talking about straight ROI, this gives you a second benefit, which is fairly substantial. Then tonight, we're going to be talking about skills training. And as I indicated, as you start an Opportunity Zone project, it would not be surprising to find that somewhere along the way, whether it's the construction workers or it's skilled workers or something else, there's a shortfall. And that there's something that is not available to them, and that's going to become a drag on the entire project. We've talked to some rural areas in particular where they managed to recruit a company in with 50 to 100 new employees and immediately had a housing shortage that they had to deal with. So they're working on the housing element, but at the same time, if this is a brand new type of business or it's a high-tech, fast-moving business, like we'll be talking about in a little while in the hemp industry, it's a blank canvas. There is no one that knows how to do this particular thing. There is no person who's got a 4-year degree or even a 2-year associate degree. It's even hard to find anyone who may have gone through a weekend training program. So you're going to have to train an entire workforce from scratch and do it in a hurry to try to catch up with the rest of the industry. So this is something that is becoming, again, a major factor on whether a particular Opportunity Zone project may be all it can be, or whether it's going to be slowed down because there's a lack of workers who can do the work that needs to be done. So that's going to be what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, at this point in time, we have an opportunity if somebody has a project or a fund and wants to talk about it, we allow them 5 minutes at the front of the room. Yes?
I have a quick question. I don't know if
Sure.
you already covered it, but just regards to the fundamentals of Opportunity Zones.
Sure.
Can I, looking as a real estate investor, can I invest directly into real estate? Do I have to go through a fund? What's the basics of this?
The requirement is you have to go through a fund. So view the fund as almost a passive pass-through vehicle that's doing accounting and record keeping for the benefit of the IRS. It doesn't have to be an active operation. It can be, but generally it's more beneficial for it to go through the fund into a business or to a property that you're working on.
And can I withdraw those funds at any time and pay the taxes due, or is it more like an IRA type of situation?
So the question is, can you withdraw an investment once you make it? And the answer is no. Is that the intent is that this money is to sit and work and grow and compound within the community. So if you take money back out of the project before the end of the 10-year term, then that would be a problem. Now, if the property is generating ordinary income, that story is going to change a little bit. So say, for example, you invest in a fourplex and you're renting it out for the full 10-year term. you're moving tenants in and out, and you're collecting rents every month. The money that comes in from rents is ordinary income, and you can disperse that. And that's what a lot of the projects are doing, is they're using the ordinary income from their project to accumulate enough to pay the taxes when they come due in 2026. The property remains intact, so the money is working within that initial investment, but the income that's coming in from ordinary gain can be distributed without impacting your tax incentives over the term.
Lastly, what's the function of the fund once the property is purchased? I would own the property, I assume. Is the fund involved in any way, or is that just?
Okay, so the question, what is the role of the fund? Its first purpose, as I said, is essentially an externalized bookkeeper for the IRS. These people had capital gains, they invested it here, we keep all the records, we report twice a year to the IRS, and that may be all the fund does for the 10-year time period. Now, there is the potential for a fund to directly invest into properties or directly invest into businesses, and the fund I'm working with in New Mexico is going to use the fund as an active operating entity. So it's going to directly invest into businesses from the fund rather than getting into yet another enterprise. Now in that case, the fund's being managed by an outside entity. So you have the fund sitting here, outside management company, and then all the businesses it's investing in. So in that case, it's a fully operating fund, but they've outsourced a lot of the day-to-day operations to yet another entity by contract. So there's different ways of structuring this. Most people are not using the fund as an operational entity because they need more time to deploy the money. And if they push the money through the fund into a business or property with a full tilt business plan and use of proceeds, they have up to 31 months in which to spend that money and put it to work, because they're anticipating that projects out of the gate are slow going, or they hit a permitting problem or some other problem of that nature. And so it's intended to give both a business and a property who's an opportunity zone business a longer runway to get something going. Okay, as I was saying, we invite people who have an opportunity zone project or a fund or a community project that is setting a table to become an opportunity zone project to come and present during these events. If you're interested, just contact me in advance. We'll get a slide deck, 4 or 5 slides, give you 5 minutes at the front of the room so you can share this with everybody and use this as a recruiting resource for your project. And because this program is videotaped and posted on YouTube, it has the potential to reach out to people everywhere. So keep that in mind if you're interested in doing that. And with that, that ends part 1 of tonight's program.